Hello and welcome back to Jack of Politics. I'm Jack and I'm very happy to have Cliona O'Halloran, who was the former local election candidate for the Green Party for Cove, back on the show today. In the last number of days, Cliona has been announced as the Green Party candidate for the Cork East general election constituency area. It's very nice to have Cliona back on, and for those of you who listened to her interview, many of you will notice that Cliona came across very, very well and as one of the more empathetic candidates we had on the podcast. What we're going to be doing today, folks, is we're going to be asking Cliona a little bit about why she wanted to go for the general and what the general election means to her and how Cliona hopes to be of benefit to the people of East Cork. And I also want to make special note that while Cliona didn't get elected, became very bloody close. You know, she came in 7th out of a 6-seater race, which I think, folks, you know, that just goes to show how well she did, you know, and she beat the next candidate down by over 100 plus votes. So I think that needs to be taken into consideration as well, because it was such a slim margin. I think we're very lucky to have Cliona running again for us in the Cork East area. So Cliona, you're very welcome back.
Great, thanks, Jack. Appreciate it, and thanks for the mention there of the locals, because I'm really proud of the campaign that I ran, the locals, and I really enjoyed it. And it came down to 22 votes in the end, which is, you know, more than I could have hoped for, to be honest with you, because after the first count and the first distribution of votes after an elimination, I thought, okay, I think this isn't going to happen. But then as the count went on, it was a bit of a roller coaster, really exciting, but I got a lot of transfer. So I'm really, really delighted with the support that I received for the local election as a first time candidate. And so it was great, and thanks.
And I think as well that you did a lot of hard work coming up into the local election, Cliona. You know, you were out knocking on doors nearly every day of the week. And, you know, as well, you were back in college as well, doing a master's in sustainability, and as well as being a parent to 2 young kids. You know, to come with those kind of factors factoring into it, you did absolutely fantastic. You know, now I got it. I'd like to say I got it 66% right with my predictions of who was going to get in.
Yeah, it's tough. It's tough to know really on the day how it's going to go. Of course, there was some surprises, all right. Some surprises even of the number of votes that some of the people that didn't get in, right? So it was tough. And you see, there was a lot of candidates from Cove Town, which is one of the bigger populations, right, of the Cove local electoral area. I'm very proud that I had a lot of support outside Cove as well as inside Cove. So that's really great. These things are always really hard to call. I imagine the general election is going to be very exciting, really, and very interesting. Yeah.
Yeah, and I think, like I've been saying to people on the podcast here for the last number of weeks, is that we think the general election is going to be sooner rather than later. Like, I know the government are saying, yeah, it's going to go into March 2025 is when they're going to have it. But common sentiment is that they're going to give a good budget next month on the 2nd of October when they bring out the budget, and then they're going to go for a November election. Now, that's yet to be confirmed, but have you any inklings of when they might call for general?
I don't really. I think we're getting the same message. It's up to the Taoiseach to call it, and he is doubling down on March. But I think you're right. It'll all depend on how the budget lands, to be honest with you, how that goes down with people. Whether or not I guess Simon Harris will, if that goes down well, that he'll ride on the success of that and call it a general election area. There's pros and cons to each. You know, still obviously work to be done. And you know, there's so much work happening. There's still a lot of work to be done, and getting an extra few months of that work would be great, I think, particularly for the Greens. But the downsides is, you know, running a campaign in winter, knocking on doors in winter. It'd be very hard to get volunteers, and nobody wants to answer the door to you in winter either. Sure, why would you? You know what I mean? So that's a tough time of year to run a general election as well. So yeah, look, pros and cons to everything. Whatever it is, we'll take it in our stride.
Yeah.
I suppose I'm happy with either one. Um, I think it'll be November as well, personally, but I have no inside information that would suggest that
Yeah.
that's the case. We're getting the same
Mhm.
message. Yeah.
Yeah. And like as well, like you've been very, very active, even though you didn't win the local, you've been very, very active as the local area rep for the Greens, and it's fantastic to see. And when we compare it to some councillors that are out there, right, that are independent councillors, and so on and so forth, you're probably doing a lot more work than some of those councillors, right, in terms of community engagement, making sure that people, if they have a query, that query is being answered, and making sure that representation is being made for people who are having issues.
I'm doing a lot of work. Yeah, in the background. Not everything you put on social media. I think that, look, to be fair, maybe I'm in a fortunate position in that because I didn't get elected, I don't have people have the burden, but all that extra work that councillors have to do,
Hmm.
just to be fair to councillors as well. And for me anyway, the local work, the activism, the projects I'm working on, I was always going to be doing those no matter the outcome of the election. That was always my priority. That's what I started doing before I became the local rep for the Greens. Is it's that work, and I love it, and so that's not going to stop.
Mhm.
Yeah. Look, I suppose to be fair to the councillors, they have a lot on their plate. I am there are a lot of things like I'm frustrated by that I'm not seeing. I've even had to reach out to the council for what are the meeting notes from
Yeah.
local meetings and stuff. They're not very forthcoming, and I think it's really important that both local and at a county level, that the public should have access to see what's going on in those meetings and what's happening.
Yeah.
Um, well, yeah, look, and I'd love to see the Cork County Council meetings live streamed like they are in Dublin, but
Mhm.
maybe some.
Yeah. A kind of more transparency.
Absolutely. Yeah, just give people that opportunity. We shouldn't have to, where there's a lack of information, where there's a void and a vacuum, we know what fills that, right? It's disinformation, it's assumption, it's frustration. So I think more transparency would be great. And then just give the electorate in general a better opportunity to see who they voted for and what they're up to and the work that they're doing.
And I think it's very interesting in East Cork for the next general election that for the first time in years, we have two incumbents standing down in the same general election. We Deputy David Stanton stepping down, who's done a fantastic job over the last 25 years as a TD for the Cork East region, and Sean Sherlock, who's been in politics for roughly the same amount of time as Deputy Stanton. Both stalwarts of politics in East Cork, and both stepping down. And it kind of brings into question that they were like, because you're losing two incumbents, that means that those two parties are going to lose their incumbency key for those seats, and like it's very hard to beat an incumbent, but it's also very, very hard to retain a seat if you don't have the incumbency factor, you know? So
Yeah.
I'm just kind of thinking, what is your kind of or outlook? Are you optimistic towards the general? Are you kind of a bit apprehensive? What's your kind of opinion about it so far?
Um, I know it's going to be tough. I'm not I'm not naive to think that this is going to be an easy campaign.
Hmm.
Um, I do see, I suppose even just going on my own local election campaign, that there is an appetite to see more women in politics,
Hmm.
which is great. And we can see that nationally as well. We can see a cultural shift even globally towards having more women in politics. So that in itself is really important. We need more balance. We haven't had a female TD in Cork East in a really long time. And we need representation. And so, having 4 male TDs isn't representative of the Cork East population.
No.
So that's kind of one thing. And I think that'll be really interesting. I think it'll definitely have an influence on the general election. For sure, it's easier for incumbents to retain their seats. I think that Fianna Fáil and Fine Gael have a big stronghold in Cork East. I would like to see a kind of centre left candidate in there, whether it's ideally I'd love to see myself elected. I think I bring an awful lot. I think it could bring a big change in perspective. And I know it'll be a tough race. We've also got Liam Quaid running in the Social Democrats, and I haven't seen a Labour candidate announced yet. So whether someone's going to fill the big shoes of Sean Sherlock, So yeah, look, it'll be. I think it's open. I think it's definitely a bit more open than it was in the past now that there's two incumbents down. I think that's really good, and I hope that there'll be really good debates. I'm hoping to see a few hustings. I'd love to be going on to a few hustings and really have a new conversation. We've got a lot of people. I think the demographics of Cork East, they're very wide. We've got a massive rural area. You've got a big industrial area, and then you have a booming urban areas, and we've got a lot of new Cork East people too, so we've got changing demographics. So I'd like to see the makeup of our TDs reflect the demographics of our constituency.
Definitely. And I think the fact that it's very, over the last couple of weeks, we've seen that Fianna Fáil have chosen James O'Connor and Kevin,
Noel McCarthy? Noel McCarthy? No,
it's for Fianna Fáil. They've picked James O'Connor and is it Una O'Keefe, I think, as the two Fianna Fáil candidates for the Cork East area. But we've also seen with Fine Gael that they've picked Councillor Noel McCarthy and Dave Stanton's son, Mark Stanton, to run, right?
Yeah. Sorry, it's Deirdre O'Brien's Fianna Fáil, and James O'Connor and Deirdre O'Brien. Yeah.
Deirdre O'Brien, yeah.
Yeah. Mark Stanton and Noel McCarthy. Apologies for Fine Gael.
And we've seen this morning that Independent Ireland have selected a candidate to run in the East Cork area. So it's shaping up that'll be a fairly interesting race, if anything.
Yeah, and then I think there's a fourth female candidate as well. So, which is good. It'll definitely be very interesting. Yeah, I honestly think that Cork East is going towards 5 seats. I imagine that in the next general it'll have 5, considering the population growth, and I think that would make sense. But we're still 4 seats at the moment.
Yeah, and I think that we'll probably be seeing that if Cork East does go to a 5-seater, I think that'll be a very interesting kind of turnout for elections as a whole, and Cliona, because Cork East is, for anyone that knows Cork East, it's the largest part of Cork, right? And it's probably the economic powerhouse behind the south of the country, because if you think about it, we have a lot of the healthcare factories in East Cork. We have a lot of the kind of we have a lot of the factories in East Cork. We have a lot of the kind of pharmaceutical industries down in East Cork, and as well we have the refinery down in East Cork. So that's a massive amount of kind of capital, a load of kind of tax capital just in Cork East alone. Because if you think about it, we have the big IDA down in Carricktool, and then over in Athada we have the big massive refinery, and in kind of Carricktool as well we also would have the pharmaceuticals like Stryker and Gilead and GE Healthcare, so big massive stuff like that. Now, kind of veering away more to kind of what you want to achieve now as a TD, right? So the first couple of questions I'm going to ask you, Cliona, are very kind of what people want to see happen for change over the next 5 years for government. And the first question we're going to ask you is, while public transport under the Greens has come on leaps and bounds, a lot of people are still saying there needs to be more done for public transport. And a lot of people are welcoming the double tracking of the Middleton to Cork line, but a lot of people are still feeling they want the train line extended back down to Youghal, to open that rail corridor back up and to allow people to go down to Youghal and to reopen it up as a tourist town, because, as a lot of people are saying quite rightly, Youghal isn't getting the same amount of attention that it deserves because of the lack of a rail line.
Yeah, I agree completely. I think it would be brilliant to have the rail plan extended out down to Yonne. It makes a lot of sense, and not just for tourism, but for it's a beautiful place to live. It's a beautiful part of the world, and it would make sense for it to be connected. It just sometimes, some days I'm like, why were these rail lines ever closed? It's just mind boggles. But anyway, and there's no reason why that can't be done, right? Like obviously, there's anything has the usual blockers in terms of like funding and planning or whatever, but this is all possible. Like I think some people think, oh, just because there's a greenway put in that direction, now you can't put in a railway line. Of course you can. Of course you can. And ideally, you'd put it, at fairly closer to where the villages are, the roads, etc. So you've got connection between buses and railway lines. So on public transport in general, absolutely, so much has been done, and the train is on the track, so to speak, right? There's loads of work coming. The double tracking is starting. The stuff that people say, sure, look, they're all, it'll never happen. It's actually happening. So that's really good. But and we're in this transition period in general, right? We're in a transition now where lots of things, not just public transport, lots of complex systemic issues are moving in the right direction. But these are things that can be done overnight, right?
No.
So yeah, but from an urban perspective on public transport, yeah, brilliant. There's a lot of work to do in the rural, particularly in Cork. So like around the country, I see colleagues of mine who are saying, there is local link buses being rolled out here, there, and everywhere, which is fantastic. I'm not seeing as much of that in Cork. And I think that's a big opportunity. I know in general, bus areas are finding it hard to get bus drivers, right? So it's going to be hard for any group to get bus drivers. That's a big problem, recruitment. But the point being is that there's big opportunity for rural transport, and then connections into urban areas. So connections between rural towns. Like not everything has to go from the rural village into the city. People might just want to go to the next rural town, So I think that sometimes the planning can be a bit like urban centric. And then connections. So like for instance, we've got here in between like Middleton and Cove, and by the end of the decade we'll have 10-minute services or trains, which is fantastic, but we need bus connections to keep up with that, right? So that we can connect people to the bus. Or, in some areas I think there's an opportunity for parking where, it's just not viable to get a bus out into maybe certain areas, but you could drive a certain way and then get the train where you need to go, right? Or the bus where you need to go. So we need to be thinking holistically. So I think, rural bus service is something I really want to push. It's something I've been working on here locally, engaging with a private bus operator, trying to get the rural part of Cove connected into the town, and then they'll have further on commuter connections into Cork, right? So look, my background is essentially in IT, right, in project management, IT and business process re-engineering.
Yeah.
And so I have a kind of a systems thinking brain, right, where it's like I look at things, I look at the wider picture. Okay, if you change this, what else does it impact, positively or negatively? Right? And that's what we need to be thinking about, the bigger picture, and then work down into the local from there. So I've worked on really complex business problems, global business problems. So there's that, right? There's that kind of, I suppose, solution focused problem solving mindset that I have. But then if you can't communicate that, then what's the point? And I think communications and are just such an important part of this. I think as a TD, that's something that I would bring, that really clear being honest with people. I think sometimes we can be a bit condescending, not we, as in TDs, politicians, can be a bit condescending around, not being, people aren't stupid, right? People understand these things. Let's just be very honest and transparent about what the problems are, and what the solutions could be. So I think that there's that's from my skills, that's why I reckon I would bring to it. And it's just taking that professional, that kind of corporate background and bringing that to political, and then So that's my professional skills. And then I know you mentioned the top of the podcast there about being more empathetic, and I appreciate that. It's a big compliment. And I'm glad that comes across, because as a mother
Mm.
and as a woman, right, not to be sound like this is a gender specific quality, but as a woman we do think about everyone else, and we forget about ourselves. But we do think about the impacts of everyone else. And one of the reasons I decided that I wanted to leave a very well paid career and get into firstly activism, and then politics came along afterwards. And also be self-employed, working in the area of helping businesses become more sustainable, because I could just see that we've got this huge problem. We're already seeing climate change. We're already seeing breakdowns in nature, right?
Right.
It's happening. But then there's this massive opportunity to solve so many systemic social issues that have come about because of the way that we have been living, right? Because of this massive gap between the wealthiest and the poorest. And so there's so much opportunity. And so things like the local bus project that I've been working on. Yeah, look, I'm from the Green Party. Environment is so important in this, right? If we can get cars off the road, fantastic. But for me, the biggest opportunity here is closing a social gap, where there are people who might be isolated or lonely, or there might be people who are, they're maybe not taking job opportunities or opportunities to even to socialise and meet other people, which can affect your mental health, because they don't have access to affordable, regular, consistent public transport. And, it's massive. So it's massive from a social perspective. It's massive from an economic perspective, because when we go to other countries, and people always say, oh, the Nordics are great. They pay more tax, but the tax money goes really far. That's what we want to see. We want to see our tax money working harder for us. We want to see strong public transport in place. For tourists to be able to come here and expect the same thing we expect when we go to other countries. And that's, a decent public transport system. So yeah, look, there's just so much opportunity. And I suppose you can probably tell that I'm like so passionate about it. And for me, I know I can make a difference, and I feel like it'd be a waste if I didn't put that knowledge and skill set to good use. It wouldn't be good it'd be a waste. And ultimately, I'm a mother to young kids, right? So I'm thinking about their future, and I want the best there for them and our future generations.
And I think as well, what a lot of people don't realise about the rail networks and bus networks in Cork is, in the next 10 to 15 years, they're all going to be electrified. That, like, all the buses, public transport buses in the country will be electric buses, and all the trains that are running across the country will probably be electrified as well. And I just wanted to make this point as well, that what a lot of people are kind of, a question a lot of people will be asking then is, you're bringing in all this electrical load onto the grid, for the likes of battery operated vehicles.
Yeah.
What's the Green Party's solution to ensuring that the grid is able to meet the demand of those additional electric buses and electric trains? Because I know that's a question people are going to be asking.
Yeah, for sure. And that makes sense. And these things are all lining up with the offshore wind, so we're going through a transition phase. And by the end of the decade, we like the offshore wind development off Wicklow is starting now, right? Which is great. As in, there's a developer on board, which is fine. I know people are frustrated because I think a lot of people will say, why can't we just have the wind turbines? But there's so much groundwork to be done.
Yeah.
Make sure, ecologically that they're in the right place. But it's accelerating. So it's good. So all these things will come hand in hand. But I read a really interesting article on RT News, I think it was, the other day. Find the link and I'll share it with you in case you want to put it in the podcast notes. But it was comparing, just back to, I suppose, electric vehicles, which I don't think, by the way, are the solution to our transport problems. But electric vehicle, if we were to electrify all the cars that we have in the country right now, the equivalent power that they would use is still less than a few months a year of the amount of data centers in the country, And again, we need data centers because we have a massive, digitalized world now, but everything has to be in balance. So, with the electrification, it'll come at the same time as the energy transition to renewables. And maintaining that balance, I imagine, is not easy, but there are very well-paid people in, say, ESB and Department of Energy who are mapping all this out. So my concern though, right, is a stall in progress in all this. I do have a deep concern that even though I think that the other parties have much more much stronger sustainability policies than they had before, I do, be honest, think that's down to the influence of the Greens, and then also realisation of how have. I would be concerned, and I think it's only natural to be concerned that progress will be stalled. If, depending on who gets into government, it's likely to be between Fine Gael and someone else, right? Whether it's so. I think that my challenge, and this is, I suppose, running in the general election, is to make people aware that there is a transition in progress. It's happening. It's going to be a bumpy few years. It's bumpy right now. And there's going to be disruptions. There'll be disruptions, I suppose, with new infrastructure put in place. Hopefully not too disruptive. And we're going through, we're going through a change, right? And it's going to be a bumpy few years, but we either do it now, and we focus on achieving the 2030 goals, or if we regress, we're going to have bigger problems to deal with in the future. So I would say challenge your TDs about how they want to keep pushing forward with the sustainability transition. And I will be challenging my fellow candidates on that as well.
And that's very reassuring to hear, Tina. And I know as well there's a lot of work planning work being done off the West Coast as well, about building that massive wind farm off the West Coast that could potentially be providing 100% of the country's electrical demand, and the surplus then that's generated off of that wind would actually be being sold back to Europe. So if that's like, you are right, it is going to be a disruptive few years. But another question, like energy security, is a big kind of question as well for people, that people are kind of worried, if we switch over to wind, if it's not a windy day, what's going to happen with all those wind turbines that are off the west and east coasts? That like people are going to put one and one together and kind of go, look, well, it is a brilliant idea. It's all dependent on wind.
Yeah, I suppose people are used to seeing maybe onshore wind turbines that will stop when it's not a windy day. The big difference between onshore and offshore is that it's always windy offshore, right? Almost always windy offshore. But storage will be really important. So storage, again, it's a complex issue, right? So there's multi-factor solutions for a complex issue. So storing energy in batteries is really important. Our solar revolution that's happening at the moment will play a big role, right? So as many buildings, whether residential or commercial, that we can get as I suppose energy independent as possible, that's brilliant. We've got the big Celtic interconnector then that's being built, right? So yeah, that the purpose of that is to be able to buy and sell energy between Ireland and mainland Europe. So their excess can come to us, we can send excess to them. Some of that will be, I believe, will be nuclear from France, right? We don't want to build nuclear in Ireland, right? But if they've got nuclear in France, they've got excess. So I think, are we saying by 2030 that we're going to have absolutely no reliance on gas? I don't know for sure. I think that's the goal, but storage plays a big role. And then reducing energy consumption is the other thing, right? Which is happening. We're reducing our energy consumption too, which is really important. So it's multi-factor, and energy security really, at the end of the day, is such an important social. We've seen the war in Russia, how that impacted Russian invasion of Ukraine. How that impacted our energy prices, right? But in general, when you've got several billionaires controlling oil and gas, and as Mary Robinson said, was it the year before last, the was 3 trillion that oil and gas made, from fossil fuels, and the consumption of a resource that is all of ours, right? The natural resources, but they're being commoditized by billionaires and controlled, and it's just mad, right? Whereas we got all this, we've our natural resources, our wind and our solar, they're limitless.
Mm.
They're so we'd have a reduction in our energy costs, but we'd have that energy security, and then that's just one less thing to worry about, right? As well.
Definitely. Definitely. And kind of tying in with kind of energy efficiency is, I know kind of like the government at the moment are very strongly pushing and advocating for people to avail of the SEAD grants of kind of like putting
Yeah.
insulation into houses and stuff like that, and kind of improving, say, a house's energy rating, say a B or a G rating up to, say, a B1 rating, And
Yeah.
I'm just kind of wondering,
There's a lot of untapped grants there that people aren't aware of. I was chatting to this about over email with someone this morning, just because they were curious. I suppose they wanted a bit more information on solar grants, but what I uncovered was that but the grants are good on them, but they're still quite expensive. But I uncovered actually what the main thing they need to do first is avail of the insulation grants. Like the grants are huge on them. So for like a 3-bed semi-D, you might pay a few €100 to have your whole house insulated, attic and walls. So, and then I suppose another thing that a lot of people just aren't aware of is that there are fully funded energy upgrades from SEAI. So like if you are someone who has, there's a bunch of different welfare payments that will qualify you. So you're a homeowner. So you're not, this is separate from social housing, which the local councils are working on, right? They're upgrading, I think every day, one house every 2 days, right? But this is if you're a homeowner and you are on welfare payments such as fuel allowance or working family payment, job seekers, and you've a child under 7 years of age. There's actually a bunch of them that I would recommend that people check out. And whether you are entitled or someone, you can get fully funded retrofitting of your home. And see, this is social progress that we need to make, right? We need to be looking after those most vulnerable. And what we're doing at the same time then is reducing that carbon footprint of that as well, but making it accessible. So there's a lot of grants there. I hope the grants stay. I would actually like to see them increased. It can be hard for grants. I know people say, oh, there should be bigger grants for electric vehicles. Fine, but then you see there's market sensitivities, right? So you increase the grant, but then the car companies just could increase the cost of the car. So like really, like what's the benefit? I suppose you could say about everything, but so yeah, I think, but like chargers, installing of extra chargers into homes, I would like the grants to be kept on those and increasing those. So supporting people if they do need to buy an electric. I would recommend though, just on vehicles, on electric vehicles, because I know that people think that the Greens just want everyone to move to an EV. But I would say, and I think I've said this maybe in the previous podcast, is if you're buying a new car anyway, and you have to buy a new car, and you can't, just reduce your car usage, and use public transport, then look at all the other options first. And if you really do have to, and you can afford to, great. But I think that this is not the solution. Electrifying all our vehicle fleet is not the solution. Our population is increasing.
Yeah.
We need to get a balance between the number of cars on our roads, because we have massive congestion problems. So we can move more people with public transport. That's why there's so much funding going into public transport as well.
And another thing as well, Cliona, is the fact that while housing is coming on in leaps and bounds, there's still a very predominant housing crisis. And I think as of yesterday or the day, or as of last week, I think homeless figures had hit 14,783 people in emergency accommodation or in temporary accommodation. And the Taoiseach made a comment along the lines of that both immigration and homelessness were both being tied in together. And I'm just kind of wondering, what's your take on those comments?
Yeah, look, I found those comments really frustrating, to be honest with you, and I don't know if they were taken out of context or not. Reading it, you know what, it's the wrong link, right? So I think people need to be aware that if you are an asylum seeker, you are not entitled to homeless services, and you're also not entitled to social housing. Here locally, where I am, there is a new, beautiful new apartment complex and houses, and there is people who badly in need of homes that are going to get home soon. It's fantastic news.
Mm.
But from some months there was people saying, "Oh, it's going to be filled with refugees, it's going to be filled with Ukrainians," and I was getting this on the doors. I said, "And actually, no, it's not, because um." This it's just not the case, right? So for the Taoiseach of all people to be making that link is really disingenuous.
Mm.
And it's really frustrating to see homeless figures still rising. I know that's a transitional number. There are people who are getting housing, but then there are people becoming homeless still, right?
Mm.
And then there's also the other figure that's not counted, and that's the adult children who have to move back into their parents' home. That's actually not counted. So we want the ideal that everyone has a home, then that number is much bigger than it actually is. And housing, look, we missed a whole decade there where housing could have been built and it wasn't. And even Leo Varadkar said in hindsight, that's something they should have done. They should have built more housing, and now we're paying for it. And building new houses is slow. It's not something that can be done overnight. There is, and I see it all around, it's happening. The houses are being built for people who have been traumatized by homelessness and impacted. It's very, it's late, right, for them. But I think the one thing that frustrates me, and I know a lot of people feel the same way, is dereliction. There's a lot of dereliction around, and that's just so frustrating because there are so many buildings that have been left to ruin. I think that there needs to be bigger, I suppose, penalties for anyone who's just leaving something left ruined. Sell it off, right? There has to be, there's likely someone else who's going to have the money to invest in that. The other thing is grants for dereliction. So there's big grants there now, which is great, but you actually have to have the funds up front. So that's not accessible for many people. So that's something that needs to change as well. And I understand some of the logic behind it, and that you want to make sure that the work is done before you're giving tax money over to it. But there are other ways of ensuring that that's the case. So I would like to see more incentives for people to renovate houses, to take on those projects, and it'll give more work then for maybe the smaller builders as opposed to the big developers too. So I think that there's big opportunity there. There's obviously complex challenges around it, right? I would assume I'd like to see more CPOing, so compulsory purchase order, purchasing of local government of buildings as well. So there's a lot to be done there, and that's where I'd like to see the Apple tax money going.
Yeah. And like this kind of brings me into another kind of question, Cliona, is that people would have is, while the houses are being built, and that's brilliant to see, is pricing is still astronomically high. That, say, for a young couple in their mid to late 20s, like I am, they would need to be earning a combined salary of roughly 120,000 euros a year combined to be able to purchase a house. And I'm kind of just wondering what your kind of take on would that be. Would you like to see more the government introducing levies to bring house prices back down to make them affordable for young people? Would you like to see a kind of people being given grants to buy houses? Or what would you like to see done to kind of bring prices back down to an affordable rate for young couples?
Yeah, this is tricky, right? Because there is a lot of work to be done. There's a lot of work being done. Again, a complex issue with multiple solutions. So, affordable housing is being rolled out, which is great, right? So that's where the government has a portion of the cost, holds of the capital in your home, and it reduces the cost. So that's great. That's one solution. Cost rental is something that the Greens pushed for to be introduced into Ireland, because they saw it working in Europe. And that's where the government builds houses basically and rents them out, but the rent is equivalent to what I suppose the cost of developing it is, right? So you haven't got the profit margin on top of it. And it's usually it can be up to 40% less than the market rate of rent in that area. And that helps to dampen down rents as well. But then in terms of ownership, look, it's supply and demand, it's a market, where you've got short supply and high demand, costs go up. So it's not easy. One thing that frustrates me is the bulk buying of properties by big conglomerates, right? There was a kind of a levy put on that. It wasn't high enough. It was only a drop in the ocean. I'd say it had, minimal impact on these big developers or whatever who buy multiple houses. So I don't think that should be allowed. I don't think you should be allowed to buy up a load of property, because that's just adding to the inflation of prices. So, yeah, there's a lot of work to be done. There's stuff happening. It's great, very frustrating. Ultimately, supply. You raise the supply, that'll match the demand. That brings down pricing. So you need those 4 or 5 things there. But again, we need to keep pushing on this. We need to keep pushing forward. We can't regress on those.
Now, next question is as well, that's a big, massive issue for people at the moment, is healthcare. That the HSE is on its knees. It's at breaking point. You have civil servants in the HSE getting paid hundreds of thousands of euros per year, and you have student nurses on the other end that are struggling to feed themselves, and I'm just kind of wondering what you'd like to see done to try and see the improvement of conditions for nurses and medical staff, because we're hemorrhaging medical staff left, right and centre to Australia and New Zealand, as well as Canada and America, which is absolutely detrimental to the healthcare system here. And I just kind of want to ask you, Cliona, what you'd like to see done to kind of mitigate the loss of talent to foreign countries and try and ensure that the HSE is able to kind of get back up to what I'd like to call a pre-2005 standard of care, where it's kind of like you have a lot more nurses and doctors around and that they're not kind of incentivized to go abroad.
Yeah, there's 2 challenges there. One, I think you've hit the nail on the head, right? It's such vital work. It needs to be compensated accordingly. It's tough work. Well, it takes a particular person to be a nurse and a doctor, not just getting through the studies, but just a particular character and a resilience. And if you're going and caring for people and working long shifts and coming home and you can't feed your family, it's completely unacceptable, like completely. So that's one thing, right? And you can't blame people, families and individuals and young people for leaving, going abroad if they're not getting paid for the work that they have studied really hard to do as well, and worked really hard to get into. What housing, so much of our problems comes back to housing, because where we have a talent shortage, a skills shortage, it's all well and good if we can't house them, so there needs to be some innovative solutions for that. Whether it's the HSE itself developing accommodation so it can accommodate individuals and families. We've got an aging population. It's something we need to be mindful of. We've got an aging population, and in the future we're going to need a lot more people to look after us, Jack.
Yeah.
And a couple of generations before us now, right? So we're going to need more people, probably come from abroad, coming into this country, right? And we need that skills shortage. We fill that skills shortage with nurses at the moment from, say, Philippines and different places, and who do amazing work. So any of our services, we say, we need more of this, we need more of that. We need the people to do it, but we need the people to be able to live somewhere. And it would be great. And I know lots of people go to Australia and they have, it's still very expensive to live in Australia, don't get me wrong, but their health system, I suppose their working conditions are so much better, and quality of life. but still would love to come home. You know, they want to raise their families in Ireland. Australia isn't without its problems, you know. Yeah, again, it comes back to housing. That's why the ramp and the pressure on housing just needs to keep. We need to keep it up. We need to keep up the house building. We need to tackle dereliction. You know, there's hundreds, thousands of houses, is my understanding, around properties around the country that could be renovated. You know, so a lot of our core issues come back to that.
And as well, is another interesting thing I have as well is around education. Is anyone who is in secondary level education at the moment, you know, a lot of people are saying that the Leaving Cert is not fit for purpose anymore. It's a system of the time gone of time gone by, and it needs to be replaced with a more effective system. And I'm just kind of wondering, Cliona, you have two small kids yourself, you know, and that are in primary school at the moment. And I'm kind of wondering yourself, what would you like to see done with the Leaving Cert and Junior Cert? Would you like to see them repeat or retired and replaced with something a bit more modern and a bit more inclusive? Or what would you like to see happen as a replacement to Leaving and Junior Cert?
Yeah, the Leaving Cert is so tough. And I think it's too kind of singular in an approach for further education. I suppose in many ways it's more fair than what I've seen in other countries. And I lived in the States for a while, whereby like if you have deep pockets, you can go to college, or you can get extra resources, you know, in extra help in order to get you into college, right? So there's which is completely unfair, right? So at least from that respect, it's fair in that it's anonymous. It doesn't matter what background you come from. But then like you could go to, you know, a private school or fee-paying school and get extra help, and that will help you get 600 points in your Leaving Cert. And yeah, so look, it's really unfair from that respect, and it's also really hard and because it doesn't suit everybody. Everyone has different talents. I think it's improving now, because I've heard there's an awful lot more apprenticeships and or courses and stuff happening in some of our technical higher education institutions. But when we talk, I suppose, coming back to the green transition, sustainability transition, is we need so much more practical jobs that suit an awful lot more people. So we just need a better mix, going back to that technical university or technical third level, where apprenticeships, right? So for example, we just need a lot more apprenticeships. And apprenticeships don't have to be reserved for jobs such as carpentry and electrical. Apprenticeships can be done in computer programming, you know. Apprenticeships can be done in so many different types of careers. So I think that that's a model that we need to be investing in a lot more, because we need those skills and because it will be more inclusive. And then look, secondary education, look, it's great to see there's a big difference between when I was in school in terms of the amount of supports in secondary education, resources, special needs assistants, things like that. I have a lot of friends who are now working as special needs assistants, which is brilliant, in primary and secondary, and in seeing at a primary level how much support's there, which is fantastic as well. But yeah, we just need to be a bit more innovative in our approach. The Leaving Cert should not be, it's not the be all and end all, right? There are so many paths to achieving what you want to do, where you want to go. We just need to make that more obvious, more accessible, and give it the funding that it needs as well.
Yeah, and those are all very good answers. And I think as well the fact that, you know, the education solutions of 30 years ago don't suit the educational needs of today. And I just want to say as well that for a lot of people don't realise is that as many people that are listening to this podcast are aware, is that I was recently appointed as Youth Ambassador Officer for Cove Lions Club, and as part of my job as Youth Ambassador Officer, I've kind of undertaken a number of undertakings to better the community in ensuring that youth advocacy is upheld, and we've done that by establishing or hoping to establish a no-name club and a Ferroiga club. And a lot of people don't realise is that Cliona has actually been one of the biggest supporters and drivers behind it.
Yeah, I think it's a great idea, Jack. Do you know, like as you said, people have been talking about needing more things to do for young people to do. And this applies not just to Cove or your look and East Cork, right, but across the board. So I think it's really great. I think I'm really looking forward to seeing this get going and to seeing young people getting involved. I think we are in a weird age where social media is just so all consuming, and that the energies of young people are being put into, you know, into social Instagram, Facebook, TikTok, whatever, right? But they're not really making real connections and developing real life skills. And I imagine so many young people are lonely, and I know COVID had a big impact as well, right? And that they were isolated. And when we get into different habits, different ways of interacting, it's very hard to come back out of it. And that applies to adults as well as young people. So we just need to kind of go back to almost the basics in terms of how we as humans, because we need social interaction, right? We're humans at the end of the day, right? So I'm more of that, and it'll be much better for young people's mental health. It'd be great to have something that's inclusive, so it doesn't matter what your background is, what your race is, what your interests are. It'd be great to see kids who have no interest in sports and kids who are interested in sports, right? So it's not necessarily that other thing that other kids want to do. It should be something that all kids want to do.
Yeah.
So I think there's massive opportunity. Brogan, No Name have been really successful around the country. There's absolutely no reason why this won't be a success in East Cork, but all it comes down to really is leaders like yourself driving it. Leaders in the community driving it and supporting it. And, you know, the communities can enable themselves to make changes. And this is a complete example of that, right?
And as well is the fact that what a lot of people in Cove are so painfully aware of is in 2023, a young man who was only 29 years of age with a partner and two small kids lost his life as a result of antisocial behaviour.
Yep.
It was shortly afterwards, there was a bit of a public outcry saying that there wasn't enough stuff for teens in the town. However, that kind of fell on deaf ears. But since my appointment as youth ambassador officer, I have kind of seen it with my own two eyes that we need alternatives to the GAA, to the soccer, to the boxing, because while those are brilliant assets to any town, I am not saying they're detrimental, because that would be absolutely foolish of me to say. Some kids just need a different outlet than what those other kids that are in those sports clubs have. Yeah. And the way I look at it is that it's about empathy, it's about encouragement, it's about advocacy for kids that might not necessarily have the best chance in life, and it's about giving them a better chance to kind of say, thanks to No Name, thanks to Freuga, and thanks to, say, the leaders in those organisations, it kind of helped me get back on track. It helped me get my leaving cert, it helped me get into college, and because of them now I'm a better person.
Yeah, totally. Look, and you know, you talk about the GA and other organisations, and they're all volunteer led. You know, they're all leaders in the community. So, I suppose when we call on things to be done, it's about finding those volunteers and leaders in the community who will do it, right?
Yeah.
And then, you know, there's government supports and funding available then to support communities to enable change themselves, which is really, I think you're right. Look, there's many places have issues with antisocial behaviour. We see pockets of it in Cove and East Cork as well. And we won't catch everyone. There will be people who fall through the net. But that's when I come back to, you know, complex challenges needing multiple solutions. This is one of the solutions that will help, that hasn't been there now. And you will definitely catch a lot of kids, I think, you know, that would otherwise fall through the net. Whether it's getting in trouble or whether it's, you know, their mental health or whether it's, you know, other things. I think it's just that it's a massive opportunity. And the other thing is that there's going to be a full-time community officer. So I met with the Gardaí, actually myself and Sam Byrne met with the Gardaí a number of weeks ago, just talking about the challenges that we're having, and what support structures are in place, and how are the Gardaí feeling about necessary resources. And there isn't enough guards, obviously, nationally, and hopefully the recruitment will pick up there. But there is a full-time community officer being appointed to Cove, which will be great, and there'll be someone who's really embedded in the community, and a meeting with clubs and local representatives. They should meet with Fergal O'Name, and really understanding where the challenges are, because it's that kind of on the ground knowledge that's so important. And maybe it was there in days gone by when your local guard knew everyone, and that's kind of changed. But and we have a really good junior liaison officer in the town as well, so who's doing really great work that people won't be aware of. You see, I suppose what people, they'll see the instances and the issues happening, but not the ones that are caught in the net, that are they're diverted from bad behavior. That's not measured and not reported, and there's a lot happening. So again, complex issues need multiple different solutions, and I think that this is a really big opportunity, and I'm only delighted to help support, and thanks for asking me.
So folks, that's been our interview with Cliona O'Halloran, the Green Party candidate for the general election in Cork East. We hope you've enjoyed this interview. Our next interview will be out 2 weeks' time, so until then folks, this is Jack signing off for Jacked Up Politics. We'll catch you on the next one, and have a good day. Bye.
Trouble don't last when the tough get going. Baby, all we do is win, so show me my opponent. Adversity, doubt, stress, could care less, cause how we handle those like an S on our chest. Super proud of how we held it down on the way up. Can't wait for our day to ball. This is a late